Hello and welcome to yet another ANAMED book talk, this time organized in collaboration with the Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center. I am Emir Alışık and I am responsible for the talks and exhibitions at ANAMED. ANAMED regulars among you may remember that Boğaziçi University's center is a long-time partner in many of ANAMED's initiatives. One of the most significant recent collaborations was the Odyssey of Byzantine Studies in Turkey exhibition, curated by Koray Durak, the center's deputy director, who is also with us today. And speaking of exhibitions, I'd like to remind you that just recently ANAMED opened its new exhibition, All Fanar is Here, which focuses on the 18th century Fanariot lives and careers. So please visit that as well. Today's panel features Leonora Neville's 2019 book, Byzantine Gender, following its Turkish publication a few months ago. To match the conversational style of Professor Neville's writing, the editor and translator of the Turkish edition are here to engage in a discussion with the author immediately following her presentation. We hope the audience, you, will further enrich this conversation with their questions and comments. And I'd like you to note that Berke Çetinkaya, the translator of the book, will join us online. You'll see him here soon in a huge manner, let's say. So without delay, I am pleased to first introduce Leonora Neville, the founding director of the Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center. After receiving her PhD from Harvard University, she established Byzantine history as a core discipline within the history department at the Boğaziçi University. And I think I can stop here about her. Many of you know her very well. So please join me in welcoming Professor Neville to speak more about our institutional collaborations and today's panelists. Çok özür dilerim. Tamamdır hocam.
Thank you, Emir, for this introduction. And thank you, dear Leonora, Berke, who's joining us, who's going to be joining us online, Bihter, dear colleagues among us, students, I see many students, happy to see many students, and other guests for being here. On behalf of the Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center, I am very pleased to welcome you to today's collaborative event, exciting session on the occasion, as Emir already mentioned, on the occasion of the recent publication of the Turkish translation of Leonora Neville's book titled Byzantine Gender. But for those who might not be familiar with the Byzantine Studies Research Center of Boğaziçi University, let me just say a few words about our center, about us, and our events, activities. So on the screen, you see our website, or a snapshot from our website, where today's event is listed along with some other recent events of ours. So at the bottom you can see the address, the website address, and you're encouraged to visit either the website as well as our social media applications to follow the events of activities, both of our center as well as other activities that are listed under news, Byzantine-related activities. Established in 2015 at Boğaziçi University, almost simultaneously with Koç University's GABAM, the research center, now called Sevgi Gönül Byzantine Studies Research Center. Our center is the first Turkish center attached to a state university that is dedicated to Byzantine studies directly. GABAM being established at Koç University, hence a private university or a vakıf university. We make this distinction, but it was like 1 week apart or 2 weeks apart that we were established during the same year in 2015. And until then, unfortunately, there was no center directly associated with Byzantine studies. And so until that time, actually, ANAMED was taking care of a lot of Byzantine dedicated events, which I used to call then Turkey's Dumbarton Oaks. In any case, our center, since its establishment in 2015, has been engaged in various activities that range from organizing Byzantine Greek summer schools to organizing 2-day intensive educational seminars that we call Tools of the Trade seminars, as well as lecture series, and international conferences as well as national conferences, and also grants, at least during our first 7 years, to graduate students focusing on specializing in Byzantine studies, when we were lucky to have money from a generous grant from the Mellon Foundation. In any case, our collaboration, as Emir already mentioned, with ANAMED as Boğaziçi University Byzantine historians goes back a long time, and we've been very happy, and also on this occasion, to be collaborating. For instance, only yesterday, our center at Boğaziçi hosted a ANAMED fellow, the ANAMED senior fellow, Erika Rowan, who gave a lecture on our lecture series, Foodways of Byzantium. And perhaps the greatest collaboration, the exhibition mentioned by Emir, and here you can see the exhibition poster curated by Koray Durak, our center's vice president, and another that was in 23-24, and another scene from that event. Now, before I start introducing our speakers and our discussant today, let me just make one other small announcement, which is Leonora Neville will actually be coming back to Istanbul in May, and we are very happy that she has accepted to give a lecture at our center, at the Byzantine Studies Research Center at Boğaziçi University on May 7th, and we're looking very much forward to that. So let me now introduce our speakers first. So Leonora Neville doesn't really need an introduction, but in any case, she's the John and Jean Rowe Professor of Byzantine History and Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's also a senior fellow at Dumbarton Oaks, where I had the pleasure of spending 1 month with her last fall. It was 1 month, right? And her research interests include gender, civic religion, historical memory, and historiography. Leonora is an editor of several book series, including Cambridge Elements in Rethinking Byzantium, Palgrave's New Approaches to Byzantine History and Culture, and Arc Medieval Press's Long Roman Empire. And as for her monographs, they include, most notably, Anna Komneni, The Life and Work of a Medieval Historian, Byzantine Gender, which is our topic today, and Guide to Byzantine Historical Writing, which, of course, many of our students are using and reading and know very well. Berke Çetinkaya, who's going to join us from Wisconsin-Madison. I'm proud to say he's a former student of ours from Boğaziçi University. He holds his BA and MA degrees in history from Boğaziçi, and he's a PhD candidate in the Department of History at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's working under the supervision of Leonora Neville. Berke's research focuses on the social, intellectual, and cultural history of Byzantium, education and historiography in late Ottoman and Republican Turkey, reception studies, and digital history. He already has published articles and book chapters, and in addition to them, he's the translator of the book that we're going to be discussing today. And currently, he's working on his first monograph entitled "Byzantium in Contemporary Politics and Media: Imagined Pasts and Extremist Frontiers on and Offline," to be published by Arc Humanities Press. All this besides his PhD thesis he's going to be preparing. As for our discussant, Bihter Sabanoğlu, she is an author and art critic based between Paris and Istanbul. After graduating from Notre Dame de Sion, French high school in Istanbul, she studied English literature at Istanbul University, and then she earned her MA degree in English language and literature in Paris at Paris 3 Sorbonne Nouvelle. She received further training in Greek and Egyptian epigraphy and Byzantine art history at the École de Louvre. She is currently a PhD candidate working on reception of Byzantium in the visual arts at Sorbonne Paris 3. She publishes on history, art history, contemporary art, and literature, and she has edited volumes on Jacques Derrida and Ricardo Porro, and published her debut novel, Şüpheli Şeylerin Keşfi, in Turkish in 2022, which I dare to translate into English as Discovery of Suspicious Things. So, yes. So these are our speakers and our discussants. So allow me now to invite Leonora Neville and Bihter Sabanoğlu to the floor. You may take your seats there, and you'll be connecting to Berke.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I would also like to thank Professor Necipoglu for her opening remarks and for introducing us. We are gathered here, as you know, to celebrate the launch of a book that offers a fresh and thought-provoking perspective on Byzantium and Byzantine society. The Byzantine Gender, written by Leonora Neville, published in English in 2019, recently translated into Turkish by Berke Çetinkaya and edited by myself, explores how people of the medieval Roman Empire understood men and women, masculinity and femininity, and the norms that shaped proper behavior for both sexes. By illuminating the fundamental ways in which gender was defined and performed, the Byzantine Gender enables a more nuanced understanding of Byzantine society. At the same time, it provides the necessary framework to approach the rich otherness and sometimes the unfamiliar texture of Byzantine culture. The Byzantine Gender invites us to reconsider a world that may appear distant, yet remains closely entangled with our own, by asking how gender, identity, and power were imagined, constructed, and negotiated. While we often think of questions surrounding masculinity, femininity, and their fluid boundaries as distinctly modern, this work reveals their far longer and more intricate histories. It's a particular pleasure to host this event here in Istanbul at ANAMED, whose generous support we acknowledge, and of course in collaboration with the Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center, which continues to sustain and expand Byzantine studies under increasingly challenging conditions. We will now have the pleasure of listening to Professor Neville, who will guide us through some of the key issues in her book. Following her talk, we will turn to Berke, whose translation has made this work accessible to Turkish readers. And then I think we will take the questions at the end when both our speakers have finished. So now, without further delay, let's begin to listen to Professor Neville.
Hello, everyone. So glad to see you all here. I want to start by thanking the Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center and, of course, Professor Necipoglu and Durak for all that you've done for Byzantine studies in this city. It's wonderful to have you here and have the benefit of all of your work. And also want to thank ANAMED and everybody who's here who's been helping. All right. Today I want to share a model of Byzantine gender with you. Keep in mind, it's a schematization, right? I like to make fairly simple stories and images out of very complex matters. And the hope is that if you use this model to approach a Byzantine text or some aspect of Byzantine culture, the model of gender will help you understand it. If, however, your text doesn't fit and it doesn't help, you have to promise me that you're going to be true to your text and say that the theory is wrong, right? You adjust the theory to match reality, not the other way around. Okay. Fundamental to my understanding of Byzantine gender is that it's a combination of two factors. It's nature and your effort. It's what you want to do. Gender is both ethical as well as biological. East Roman society had a deeply rooted connection between masculinity and virtue that left just about everybody trying to be more masculine just about all of the time. Since rationality, virtue, and self-control were masculine traits to which everyone should and could aspire, everyone was subject to the social imperative of trying to be more masculine. Right? So East Romans didn't have a gender binary. They had a gender declension. The proper nature of a perfect human embryo is to become male. If the gestation process happens correctly and there's sufficient heat in the womb while a baby is being gestated, that will become a male baby. If it's not warm enough, it becomes a female baby, right? And with this nature comes other characteristics. So masculine men are hot and dry. They have a tendency to be active and to be rational and to be able to control their impulses and emotions. Whereas females are cold in their body and they're wet and they're naturally passive and they're naturally irrational and they're naturally not able to control themselves. Right? So this is what you got from nature. So if the womb were particularly nicely toasty, the male baby would be particularly masculine, right? Or if it's kind of on the edge and not maybe a little bit cool, it would be kind of a fairly feminine man. And the same thing happened for women, right? So what you got out of your womb, what you came into the world with, varied, right? And you're able to, so this is the sliding scale of natural masculinity. If it were just nature, right, with the amount of heat, as heat increases, so self-control increases, and so rationality increases. So on the one end, the low end, we have women, low in all these characteristics by nature, and at the high end, men, right? And boys move from being kind of cold and wet, and they get to be adolescents, they harden up and dry out and become real men. So this is what you get for nature, but it varies by your effort, right? When you have emotional and you have control over yourself and your actions, you're able to become more or less masculine, right? Because you could work at it. So here's masculinity adjusted for effort. Rather than the straight line across the screen, so you can have a variation where a weak woman is going to be more irrational and womanly than a good woman. And a good woman could be more strong and masculine than a weak man, right? And a man could continue to work on his rationality and his strength and his self-control and become ever more masculine, right? Masculinity. Let's make sure. So this is a mix of ancient medicine. So the natural ideas came from medical ideas of what made men and women. And the ethical came from both ancient ethics and from Christian ideas of virtue. And they blended together to create this system in which theologically there was supposed to be an existence of one human being that was characterized by varying degrees of perfection and ranged across the two main categories of masculine and feminine. And the people who are studying the theology, Damian Casey and Brownman Neal, have written since the publication of my book, and their analysis of the theology resoundingly affirms the ideas that I've presented, that everyone ought to be masculine most of the time. Right? So masculinity is it's an ideal to which both men and women needed to aspire. It's not a stable, natural state. And Christian ethical behavior became entwined with gender as the Christian practices provided a way to perfect one's gender expression. So women are called upon to act like men, right? In that they can have more rationality, more strength, and more self-control, right? And so despite the natural predisposition of men and women to different degrees of masculine rationality, it was in everyone's own hands to increase and practice your virtue and self-control, right? So classical ethical training, this is my silliest slide in that I'm condensing all of classical philosophy into a single slide. And yet, I will stand by it that one of the takeaways from Aristotle and Xenophon and Plato and Plutarch and all their friends is that virtue can be learned. Virtue can be taught, and you can get better at it, and everyone has a responsibility to try to increase your virtue. And virtue is largely a matter of restraint and control over your sexual appetites and your other bodily appetites. Right? So that's the classical heritage. And if we think about what are the changes to this that came with Christianity, and I think they're not that many, but they are significant. So one change with the Christian virtue of this system is that rather than having the ideal for self-control be moderation, not too much, not too little, in this system, you should have total abstinence, right? So the way to be most masculine, just don't have sex at all, right? Just have a much more strict idea of virtue as total control over things. So that's a change. Another big change is suddenly women can train too. For the ancient writers, Plutarch thought about women, but for the others, they didn't think about women. They just weren't part of the story. Whereas within Christianity, women had a strong need to try to become more virtuous and become part of the story of this gender declension. Another change is that celibate men who were able to achieve total control over their bodies became more masculine than sexually active men. So the construction of control over passion and appetites as the pinnacle of masculinity created a gender hierarchy in which celibate men were higher up. So you see all the way at the end, you got the monks, the most masculine people. And this is a huge change from the ancient world in which the person who had the most dominant active male sex was the most masculine person, right? And this then devalued the bodily natural aspects of gender, right? If someone who is totally celibate is more masculine than a guy who's having a lot of sex, that ability, the body becomes significantly less important, and the shift becomes more towards the end of people controlling their own virtue. And so, as you can see, women monastics could be considered generally more masculine than weak and incontinent men who couldn't keep it together. And just about all female saints are praised for how masculine they are because they have the self-control to become ascetics. Right? So everyone is trying to push that way on the scale. And these people talk about it all the time. once you start being able to see gender in Byzantine texts, you can see it everywhere. People are very worried about where they are on the line, and they're always trying to, the best way to put down someone you don't like is to push them down to the female end of things, right? But how did this manifest itself for women? I've been saying that women ought to try to be more masculine all the time, but they don't end up looking like men at all, because the manifestation of their control led to them acting in a way that was contrary to their presumed nature. Right? So by nature, right, women are irrational and they're unable to control themselves and they're chaotic and they rush around and their hair is wild and they're unstable and they're flighty and they're really sexually appetitive and they're overly emotional. Right? So what do women actually do? Well, you keep your eyes down, you keep your hair bound up, you don't say anything, you keep silent. They're supposed to not move very much. So an ideal woman doesn't, flip her hands around, but is very controlled, and you're chaste and you stay at home. Right? So the presentation of an extremely masculine woman doesn't look anything like the presentation of a masculine man. I think that's what I want to say. So the normal way for a woman to behave in this society was not like a woman, right? by their nature. So according to their ideas of the natural state of what a woman is, they didn't try to do that. They tried as much as possible to keep it under control. Right? So, given the profound misogyny of this cultural framework, it's really amazing how much stuff Byzantine women did. They did all sorts of things in which they exercised power and had considerable freedom of action. Right? How do they do it? Well, as we've said, they have the capability of becoming more masculine through control of themselves. So not thinking like a woman nor unlike a man was a phrase attributed to as a description of the Empress Theodora as she's about to go off and fight the Bulgars or send an army forth in one of the Chronicle of the Logothete. Right? So when this empress was acting properly, she's not like a woman, right? Being able to act with masculine self-control was required for women who wanted to sell land or buy land, right? So if you wanted to have a legal contract, you had to say that you weren't going to act like a woman. And the more education you had, the more you could train your virtue and care for yourself. And so education and money both became ways in which people could work on their masculinity. So this is one path to power, which is the path of being like a man. And then there's another path for power to women, which is to cry out for the men to help them. Help me, I can't possibly lift the book. Come, who wants to be a good man and lift that heavy book for me, right? It's the appeal to men to display their masculine ability to take care of things by helping people out. And we see this sometimes in historical chronicles where the woman of great power, the empress who's ruling, casts herself or is described as being weak and powerless and modest, which allows the men to take her orders without losing their masculinity, right? It allows the natural hierarchy to keep going. So this gender ideology was undoubtedly oppressive and constraining people with rules for how they should act all the time, but in that it was less tethered to physical bodies than earlier systems, and in that it was just so unstable, it also created opportunities for change and personal direction and certain degrees of freedom. Now, this is all just a quick summary of the key ideas in my book. I wanted to share one example with you of a text of how we could use this theory of gender to understand a Byzantine text. And I picked one that has no women in it at all, so that you can see the competition for masculinity even within the men. So we're going to talk a little bit about Athanasius of Athos and the simple monks who opposed him. Athanasius is the founder of the great Lavra on Mount Athos, which is the first of many very wealthy, very well-established monastic houses in this Mount Athos is a wild community for monastic practice. Prior to Athanasius and the great Lavra, monasticism was practiced on the holy mountain in one or two people, right? An individual would go off and have his own hut and be a solitary hermit, or you'd have 2 or 3 people who would live together. But it was very wild, completely uncontrolled, and very ascetic, right? So these wandering solitary monks seem to have been not that happy when Athanasius came with a huge imperial endowment and said, I'm going to build myself a big old house that can house many monks and we're all going to live together with a roof over our heads. Right? So there seems to be considerable competition between these two groups. And if you think about heroic Christian saints, right, the people who were the most extreme monks, those are the guys who are out by themselves in the desert. So the natural presupposition would be that the monks who are all on their own living in Mount Athos in the wild are going to be more masculine than the guy who wants a roof over his head and 3 square meals a day, right? So how is it that the people writing the hagiographies, the stories, the saints' lives about Athanasius managed to make him into the alpha monk, the most masculine monk, even though he's the guy who wants a roof, right? And they did it by casting the wild ascetics as simple, with an appeal to the words and the discourse of female simplicity that was used in contracts. So going back all the way to Babylonian cuneiform, if you wanted to sell something, you had to attest in your contract that you really wanted to sell it. Free will. So it's called the free will clause, and they get longer and longer. And by the time you get to the 9th century, we have Georgia says, I make and I establish my sale, and I cede through this document of my disinheritance, by the power of my own choice, desiring for my own will, and without any necessity or trickery or fear or violence or compulsion or any difficult circumstances or robbery or baiting or extortion or joking or womanly simplicity, right? Or anything else. So she has to say she's not a simple woman. And because she can enact rationality, she's got her hair bound up, she's speaking calmly, she is able to act with enough masculinity to have her sale be valid. Right? And similarly, Glyceria in 1112 also forswears womanly simplicity. These documents are exciting to listen to. I believe they would have been performed because they have so much attention to the way the words sound. There's so much alliteration and so much prose rhythm that we can be really pretty sure that a good act of sale was part of a performance of a ritual of a sale that made it strong. So the monks and the audience for the saints' lives would have heard many of these and been aware of this discourse of female simplicity, right? So then when the hagiographer has to describe the fight, when the eremites and the hermits want to go to the emperor and say, you got to get rid of this Athanasius guy, he's ruining everything, the story gets told that the wily one, right, the crafty one, the devil, stirred up the elders against Athanasius, right? After discovering that the elders of the mountain were extremely simple men who, in their spiritual zeal, did not wish to diverge from their old traditions, he went to visit all of them and deceived them one by one, taking advantage of their simplicity, right? And then the next life, also, there's 2 different versions of the life, and they both play on the eremites being simple, right? The next one, they're again extremely simple and having a great deal of spiritual zeal, but they're still enslaved to their old traditions. And the devil uses their simplicity to call them by their side. So this term for simplicity happens a lot, frequently repeated in the course of this story. So the Eremites make a presentation to the new emperor Ioannis Tsimiskis, asking him to get rid of Athanasius and return the holy mountain to being wandering ascetics. And Ioannis Tsimiskis is so impressed by Athanasius that he ends up giving him more money, and he tells the people representing the Eremites to go away. Right? So it doesn't work. And then Athanasius is reconciled with these monks who had been fighting him. And the way the reconciliation happens is that all of their objections were attributed to the crafty one. They didn't really have a sound objection to him. What they had was deceit. They had been deceived by the devil, right? And they are then cast as people who were ignorant, and they're passively acted upon by the devil, and they're basically weak. The devil's able to take advantage of them. And all those things make them feminized. In addition, they're just this simpleness is a part of a feminine discourse. And if you think about it, being deceived by the devil has been a woman's problem since Eve ate the apple. Right? And the reason why women had to say, I'm not acting like a simple woman, was that women are easy to deceive and they're easy to trick, right? So the hagiographers never say anything overtly bad. They're not punching down and insulting the old hermits, but they are assimilating them with feminine characteristics. They're making them more feminized. Let's see. And they're never overtly called women, right? So it's not the case where if you think of gender as women, you look for that term, you're not going to find it. But I think it's really quite clear that they are feminized, right? So they took bad advice, and then that allows Athanasius, even though he has the big old house with the comfortable place, he's got a fireplace, all of his monks get regular food. They're the super strong ones. They're the more masculine, and the wandering hermits are more feminine. So this is just one example of a way that you see gender is not stable, and it can be always used to tussle and fight about things. Another example of how you can see it everywhere. Once you become aware of the way in which Byzantine people were constantly working on their gender construction and fighting over their gender performance, you can see it everywhere. So thanks for your attention.
We thank Professor Neville for this wonderful lecture. We'll be taking your questions shortly. But first, I would like to give the floor to Berke Çetinkaya, who I think we will see on the big screen here. You can hear us? Berke, can you hear us? Okay. So I think we can start. Let me begin by asking you again the first question I asked when you told me you wanted to translate the Byzantine Gender. What was it in the book that you found particularly compelling or interesting to translate? And I have a second question as a follow-up. I know that your PhD research engages with themes such as friendship, kinship, and particularly masculinity in the Middle Byzantine period. I also know that you recently delivered a lecture on historical nostalgia, Byzantium, masculinity, and especially contemporary digital extremism, which is very interesting, and it's a subject that I didn't know about a lot. So could you elaborate on the scope of your research and share your thoughts on how ideas about masculinity and gender are mobilized in contemporary digital spaces, particularly in relation to Byzantium and reception studies?
Thank you, Bihter. Professor Neville, Boğaziçi University Byzantine Studies Research Center, Koray and Leonora Neville and ANAMED, everyone. And good morning and good afternoon. Istanbul, it's great to be with you, although it's online. So for why this book, particularly I wanted to translate. It's two reasons. One is why the book is important in its own domain, and the second one why the Turkish translation was needed. So for the book, I think, I mean, this book offered a very concise and introductory-like picture of what Byzantines thought about gender roles, performances, what being a man or woman really meant in the society, through the discussion of very specific case studies and examples, right? And some Professor Neville also, like I mentioned in her lecture. And there are actually many good books coming up revolving around this topic, gender in Byzantium. I mean, there has always been an interest in women's studies, some on eunuchs, now recently a bit more on masculinity, but I mean, they are all about specifics, right? I mean, but this is really one of those few books that really try to look at gender from a more heuristic perspective. So this is one reason. And I mean, it covers how Greek-Roman ideas of sex, biology, and gender survived in Byzantine mind, the relationship between gender and virtue, how people played the gender role, as Professor Neville also discussed, and the relationship between man and masculinity, the contested relationship. And it makes several historiographical remarks on the problems in historiography, like a further research areas to be explored. And when you finish the book, you are getting an idea of what really gender meant in Byzantium, but also case studies of how gender can be studied as part of social, cultural, and intellectual history, which I am also, I mean, in my own research as well, and a good amount of discussion on historiography and current state of scholarship. And so this is why this book is particularly important in its own domain, gender studies in Byzantium. In the Turkish context, why it is important, I mean, actually in the same room in 2023, me with my two colleagues, Tamer Yanık and Ulaş Deniz Tünkaya, we presented a paper on the translated books on Byzantium in Turkey in the Sevgi Symposium dedicated to Central Byzantine Studies in Modern Turkey, hosted by ANAMED and Gabon as well, right? And the reason why I translated the book is very much rooted in our observations in that paper. And I mean, there are intellectual pedagogical reasons and it's some sort of public responsibility aspect for me. I mean, in terms of intellectual motivation, I mean, we also wrote in that article, I mean, there's a growing number of translations on Byzantium in the second millennium, and especially after 2010s. But still, many of those books are the ones that covering military history, political history, or general surveys of Byzantium. And the topics covering the gender, ideology, identity are far less. And it's a fact that the number of publications on the latter, these more, let's say, niche areas of research is growing and taking a bigger portion of the books written Anglo-Saxon academia currently. But there is an unfortunate growing gap in the following the trends of current scholarship in the translated book world. So this is one reason. And the second, we also made, I mean, remarked in that article, I mean, most often Byzantinists or historians do not engage in such activity. I mean, translation, I mean. I mean, they see them as a kind of like a citing too much effort. But it's a problem because we also realize the translations made by non-experts often tend to have problems with terminology, vocabulary, contextualization. And right now there are more Byzantinists doing such work like Sirençeli, Bahattin Bayram, like doing translational work on Byzantine sources, both primary and secondary. So I also wanted to contribute to this world, you know. And I think this is something we should really aim at, creating a Turkish corpus of secondary and primary sources, which we need. And I think there is now another initiative led by Boğaziçi again, like kind of creating a corpus of primary sources into Turkish, which I think very much needed. And because there is that pedagogical aspect, one is in Turkey. Many universities have their primary language is Turkish, right? I mean, there are a few like Koç, Boğaziçi, like Middle East Technical University, Sabancı. Okay, they are like English or the course is taught in English, but the readings, but for the rest, I mean, most portion of Turkey, I mean, you need sources in Turkish if you are teaching a medieval history course or a Byzantine history course. There is almost nothing you can kind of give on this specific topic. Which is actually, I mean, if you really want to study Byzantine history, social, cultural, intellectual history, whatever history you want to learn, I mean, you actually need this perspective. And second, many of the discussions held here can be helpful for other fields of Turkish studies, Ottoman and Seljuk studies. And there are, for instance, like studies in Anglo-Saxon academia again, like how Greco-Roman ideas of gender, similar to Byzantium, really shape Islamic ideas of gender. I mean, there are like books of Captain Puni on maternity in medieval Muslim discourse, and I think like Pernilla Marine wrote a book again, like how the Greco-Roman ideals of gender and sex very much shape Islamic understandings. But I mean, these scholarships, like a reach is very limited, and if you have like a Turkish introductory source on such topic, it can lead scholars to further think about like what they can do with such framework in their own field. And the public engagement aspect, like Byzantium is a historical legacy of Turkey, just like others, no less than Ottoman or Seljuk, right? And I mean, these are the stories and livings of people in these lands like 1,000 years ago. And the way gender functioned in the societal relationship is actually like not that much different from today. And now it's available in Turkish, so I think it's also fascinating. And I mean, coming to your second question, maybe I can connect it here, like, and Byzantium itself is a highly weaponized, instrumentalized, and abused historical civilization, both in Turkey and in the West as well. And the nostalgia surrounding Byzantium are highly gendered. And this has a long tradition, right? I mean, Byzantium is an effeminate, weak, corrupted, decadent, trickery, cowardly image. It's everywhere, from politics to popular culture, everywhere, both in Turkey and abroad. And this is not something new. You can trace it back to the medieval history and then Enlightenment and modern world. But what do we really know about how gender functioned in Byzantine society, and how can we fight against these stereotypes is only possible with better information. And unfortunately, I mean, we don't know that much. And like in my thesis research work, I mean, focus on friendship. And once you go through all the private letters or like historiographies, you see like, I mean, even in this domain of friendship, whether you're a good friend or not, and I work on specific male friendship, elite male friendship mostly. I mean, you see that like whether you're a good friend or not, very much depends on how much you can really perform masculinity well in the societal standard. Or in the army, this is the same as well. And like the moral bonds surrounding friendship, let's say trust, loyalty, these are all concepts really attached to what makes a person a good man, a real man, but also a real friend, a real brother. So, I mean, whether you're a trustful, let's say, dealer on the market is very much related to your performance of masculinity as well, because like the bonds and ideals are everywhere and they are the same. And this is like this is my and not only in the letters I work with, everywhere in all historical accounts, all type of literature in Byzantium. Byzantines talk like gender narratives. I mean, they cared a lot about gender, and they legitimized and delegitimized or praised or mocked people, dynasties, individuals, emperors, statespeople, imperial women, monks, whoever you can think of, through a gender critique. And I mean, when you go through Anaponini, you see her effort to protect her father. When you go to Koniatis, you see the same, like how a man really tried to get rid of the burden of what happened, the horrible things happened to Byzantium, like to get rid of the responsible of it at a high-ranking state official. Or you see how Procopius used the same narrative to mock or praise Justinian in his different works. And these narratives passed to the Western civilization, especially after the 15th century. In the Enlightenment world, the intellectuals really thought, okay, there are so much gender critiques here. And okay, they thought they found the solution, the response of why Rome fell. Right? They thought, okay, this is the reason why Rome fell. They took all those critics as given, as truth. And it was helpful. It was helpful because it helped in their effort to create the linear civilizational path from ancient Rome to Charlemagne and then the Enlightenment Europe, and then the modern Europe, right? And like in my book, right now I'm writing the monograph on digital extremism. I also deal with far-right extremism in the West. And the one thing very much persistent there, I mean, to simply put, there are two sides. There are two narratives conflicting with each other, and they are in a conversation with each other all the time. One is Christian nationalist narrative, and the one is more Enlightenment-oriented narrative. And Enlightenment-oriented narrative, for instance, way more embraced by neo-Nazis and white supremacists, which favor Rome. And they use Enlightenment critics, and they will read all the Enlightenment intellectuals. I mean, they cite Gibbon, they cite Montesquieu, they cite Voltaire, they cite Procopius, and they use such gendered narratives of Byzantium in their defense of why Byzantium cannot be a worthy Western civilizational past against those people who favor Byzantium as a part of Western civilizational past, based on the depiction of Byzantium as a manly civilization who defended Christian realm from Islam, for instance. This is something even you can see in the far-right mass murder manifesto. For example, if there's a person like Brandon Tarrant, the Christchurch shooter in New Zealand, some of you may remember, he there, I mean, in his manifesto, again, we will conquer Hagia Sophia again. Or there's another very well-known, I mean, not maybe for us, but for far-right people, there's a person called Robert Spencer. He's a very well-known and respected far-right ideologue. He wrote recently a book called Empire of God. It's about Byzantium. And he explained the reason why he wrote the book. Okay, there's is a whole narrative of effeminate Byzantium in the West, but we have to change it because Byzantium actually saved Christian civilization at least prior for 1,000 years. So let's be fair. Let's pay the debt to Byzantium. So, I mean, why gender matters? Let me finish here. Why gender matters for us, to study. Also, when we want to counter these narratives, we have to know more about gender, and we don't know that much. There is still not much enough discussion and study on the various topics related to gender. And my PhD is also something that I conduct in this regard, and also the monograph.
Yep.
Thank you, and sorry.
No. It was all very, very interesting. These are themes with which we are not very familiar. I mean, the online weaponization of Byzantium especially. I just thought of something. I'm seeing lately a weird glorification of Belisarius everywhere, the General Belisarius, and there is a plethora of hymns about him, especially the young people among us, the students maybe who follow Instagram or so. We keep encountering reels about Belisarius, how manly he was, how a hero he was. He's considered much more manly than some emperors probably. So what is this weird fetishization about Belisarius, and how does it fit into your ideas about extreme right-wing weaponizing Byzantium?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's one. I mean, I also see that. I actually a fake TikTok account that I collect.
Can you give your username?
Yeah. I mean, now the feed is horrible, so I don't want to share it. You know, I mean, it's only not Belisarius, but many. And for the book, I actually collected some 30,000 comments from such videos, through a tool, a web scratch tool. I just took all, and I had a chance to analyze all of them. Belisarius is one of them. I mean, and for Belisarius particularly, if you go through the comments on such videos, you will see huge debates all the time. Some people claiming, no, Belisarius is not a Byzantine, he is a Roman. And then there will be huge discussions then. And you can see the same discussions on 4chan, for instance, it's a white supremacist hub, basically, right now. But you will also see discussions on Basil II as a very manly warrior emperor, rehabilitating quote unquote the Byzantine legacy. But at the same time, there are people who really do not want this to happen. And in such videos, edits, you can see that it's a conflicted world and the narratives. But there's a growing interest in Byzantium, that's for sure. In the last 10 years, for example, if you go to the Google Trends, you will see that the search for was Byzantine Empire Roman, or the similar search to that wording increased 50%. So people wonder, people want to learn, and some people go against this narrative, some people support the narrative, and in the extremist environments as well, for different reasons. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Berke. Thank you very much. I would now like to open the Q&A session by posing a question to Professor Neville. In the book, you discuss the case of Glucaria, which was pretty fascinating for me while I edited the book. A professor mentioned it briefly, but maybe I can give a few details about her story. This is one of the stories in the Byzantine Gender. Glucaria is a widow. She is engaged in a dispute over her property with the local bishop, and at one point the conflict escalates to such an extent that the bishop physically threatens her, and I think he chases her into a church with a saw in his hand. But yet she ultimately manages to overturn the donation, which was made under oath, by presenting herself as a powerless, poor, elderly widow coerced by powerful men. And while doing this, she deliberately draws on prevailing assumptions on about female weakness. So I thought of asking you how we should understand this strategy. In what way Glucaria both conforms and subverts the gender norms, and more broadly, might it be possible to call this? I mean, we would not want to impose a modern framework onto a fundamentally different anthropological model, but might it be possible to think about this as a kind of pre-modern Butlerian theory of performativity, gender performativity?
Thanks so much. This is a very interesting story in which the widow and her husband, they turned their property into a monastery and they built a church on their land, which is a fairly reasonable, not unusual thing to do, to create a monastery of your own. And they want this to be, they want to donate it to their spiritual father who's on Mount Athos. But then at some point, the same widow was coerced by her bishop, the local bishop on the island, who thought he should have power over this, which is canonically, yeah, he should have power over the church that's on his island. But Byzantine people don't follow the rules very often. He makes her overturn and deny that one to give it to him. Right? And what we have, the document we have, is one in which she says, I didn't mean it. Fundamentally, she tells a long story of all her travails and the horrible things that happened to her that cast her very much as the poor old widow without a husband, without children, with no one to help her, who's at the mercy of the violent, horrible, evil bishop. And there's a big hole in the center of the document, so we don't know exactly what happens with the saw, but it's the bishop and the widow and the saw are in the church. And this is after the rebuilt church. First, the church gets burned down in the middle of the night, so it's that kind of situation. And then she says very strongly at the end, right, that she is making this, she's, in her story, what she's doing is making the case, and she leaves out the female simplicity in her free will clause at the end of her document, because she actually wants to make the case that she didn't mean it before, and that this is what she's meaning it now. Right? So this is the 11th century widow who manages to overturn this using what I see as the path of weakness. And then there's another one, Glucaria, who's later, early 12th century, and she makes, she's selling land from her dowry, which is illegal, so she needs a dispensation from the ruling person, who at that point is sort of a duke, governor, to be able to break the law. But the monks that she's selling it to really don't trust her. All right, so they copy into her text the quoted letter that she wrote to get the dispensation, in which she says, I'm starving and my poor babies are gonna die. Please help me, please help me. And she makes herself extremely piteous and sad and worthy of help. And so then he writes off, sure, she can have the dispensation, right? And then the monks say, all right, is she going to say that we're coercing her, right? Is she going to say that this is forced? So they bring up a whole bunch of prominent men from their island and from a different island together to watch her make this statement in which she says, yep, this time I'm really doing it. So the statement that we saw, the quotation, is her saying, yeah, I'm not a simple woman. Now I'm totally controlling herself. So in one document, we see the same woman perform piteous feminine helplessness and strong masculine support and self-control. And she still has plenty of land left over after she sells this dowry part. So she continues to be a woman of strength and power afterwards. So that's a little play in performance.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So if we have any questions from the audience, we can... I'm seeing Kerem here.
Thank you. My question, Professor Neville, will be on ability and virtue think together. So, under this Christian Reformed ethics, primarily, would they consider a man with an ability to have active masculine sex more and doesn't engage with it consciously, more virtuous than a man with no means to engage in it? This could be a eunuch or any a man with any other reason. I don't know. Would they consider them to be equally virtuous, or the man choosing to abstain from sex because it's more virtuous? That's what
This is a great question, and we can produce documents that argue for both attitudes. I think the dominant one is that the person who can have sex, who controls himself, the man who can have sex and controls himself, is more strong and more masculine than the eunuch who kind of gets it for free, right? So the discourse is the eunuch doesn't have to work that hard. But there are other texts that presume that the eunuch by nature is very feminine and therefore really out of control. Right? So given that a eunuch is so sexually appetitive and so lacking in self-control by their nature, they can still have great virtue if they're celibate, right? So this is flexible in how you present yourself. So we have a strong discourse. It's a strong discourse.
Let's turn this off. Yeah, I think we can hear you. Huh?
Okay, so we've got the strong discourse saying that the eunuchs are weak and miserable and very feminine, and the other that's saying, here we go, the other that's saying that they're strong.
No, it's not working.
Here we go. Is that good? So it goes both ways. But it's very interesting how in different situations people can construct eunuchs differently, just as they can men. You know.
Thank you for the speech, and I really enjoyed your book. It was a really smooth read.
Great.
It's not exactly a question, but I just want to make sure if I understand correctly. In the end, the ultimate goal to a virtue is for a woman to be as masculine as possible. But still, you should live in the borders of your natural gender, correct?
Yes.
Is that... it's not, I think, in the book, but I also listened to your interview with History of Byzantine podcast. In there, you mentioned that Anna Komnene, first, she's really get a hold of herself. She writes in a more, how can I say it, very manly way.
Yeah.
But then she cries about her father, for example. Is that why she still needs to be a natural woman at first?
Yeah, another wonderful question. Anna Komnene does both. What she's doing in writing a history, so she's the daughter of Alexios Komnenos, who wrote a history in the middle of the 12th century. And she's the only woman to write a history in Greek that we have, I believe, before the 20th century, right? So it's a very unusual thing for her to do, and history writing was coded very much as a masculine activity. So she plays with both. First, she bookends the beginning and the end of her narrative are mourning. She's crying, and it's very much a classical threnody. So it's opening it up and ending with mourning, frames the whole thing within a funeral discourse. And the one place in which it was okay to hear Greek women was when they were mourning at funerals. Right? So she uses that to humble herself, and then she'll turn around. So she'll cry to make you feel sorry for her and to make herself low and beneath you. And then she'll turn the page and say, well, now I'm also going to assert my authority as an author. And she writes in a very highly masculine way. And in that, she's drawing on the fact that she's studied all the ancient Greek philosophy. She's read all this stuff. She has great self-control. So she expressly manifests masculinity. And then to do that, every once in a while, she has to stand up for herself. She needs to say, I have these skills. But every time she puts herself up, she cries, right? So she immediately humbles herself, right? So that she's not breaking the gender hierarchy, right? So, and with the women saints, who are all really masculine, they were still acting like women most of the time, except for the ones who lived in the male monasteries as men, right? Some of them.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I have two questions about the model of gender that we presented. The first one is rather straightforward. So is this an experience that pertains to elites in particular in Denmark, or is it applicable to everyone that was in the Byzantine Empire? The second question that I want to ask is, what's the place of queer people, to use an anachronism, of course? What's their position within this model? Can they be virtuous? What's their access to masculinity? What's their masculinities like? And so, of course, this entails non-heterosexualities and non-cisgenderness, but also I'm intrigued by the notion of how the notion of asexuality would play out, similar to Kerem's question, because asexual people stereotypically don't have a very sexually active life, but then is this the virtuous sort of non-sexual activity, or like their queerness somehow precludes their access? Thank you.
Great. Again, wonderful questions. On the elite status, the more, for a woman, the more money you had, the less frequently you had to go into the market. And if you were going to go into the market and go in public, people could see you, you'd have to be active, you'd have to be like walking around, and you'd have to shout and haggle, right? So lower class women who had to do things like going out and doing manual labor and haggling in the marketplace were seen as less masculine than their aristocratic, women who are their contemporaries. So I think masculinity is tied to class in a really interesting way. And so that low-class people, even low-class men, are feminized. And you can see this also in the Acts of Athos, when there are a bunch of the heads of household of a village try to bring suit against a monastery that's taking their territory. And within each household, these were the men in charge, right? But they're all called a crowd and a bunch of rowdy people, and so they're put down by the monks as rushing around, right? So they're feminized. So it does track with class. In terms of whether people who are lower class would have participated in it, I mentioned Xenophon and Aristotle. Because of the Christianization of this discourse, it also went into sermons, and it went into hymns, and certainly you can find it in the Psalms, right? So very basic engagement in Christianity would get you the basis of this, right? So we don't have texts from the people who are illiterate, okay? We don't know, I can't tell you for sure that people who are very poor were engaged with this, but I see no evidence to think that they would not have absorbed these as the fundamental ideas. As for queer people, we've got two instances. Every scrap of fun, non-heteronormative literature we have from ancient Greece was copied by these guys, right? So these are the people who gave us Sappho and all of Plato's Symposium, and all of the non-straight sex that we have from antiquity was prized by these people, and they continued to quote that material and really like it. There wasn't an out gay community that I can tell you about. Like, on the other hand, so what happened to the queer people? Well, we can't really see them. But there's certainly indications that, of course, there were queer people. And they're having fun with the ancient texts, and they're talking about eroticism. It's pretty clear. And I think the same ideas of virtue would have gone within that relationship, right? So if you have men writing letters to each other, or men engaging with each other, their restraint is going to show their masculinity. right? And I commend Derek Kruger just published a wonderful book on Simeon the New Theologian and monastic desire, which is a spectacular book about male desire for men in monasteries in the 11th and 12th centuries. So I read that one. And the asexual people, I think, would be told that they're doing great, you know. You're not supposed to have sex, right?
Because other than monks, I don't know if we have any trace in records or any asexual stance, or I don't know how we can...
asexual stance?
Yeah, asexual. I don't know how we can have this information apart from the monks that...
Men and women, after you had your children, it's virtuous not to have sex anymore,
okay.
Right? So the abstaining from sex is an ideal to which everyone was told they ought to adhere, right? So if you have an entire society that thinks they shouldn't be having sex at all, it gets really kind of hard to study the asexual people. I guess they're the ones who aren't miserable. I don't know.
So we can see them through abstinence. Okay.
Yeah. No, but it's so the story where. Evdokia and her husband, the widow, they decide to turn their house into a monastery. That was a normal thing for people to do. Like, we're not going to have... What does it mean if a husband and wife make their house a monastery? It means they decide they're not going to have sex anymore, right? And that was not unusual.
Okay. There's a question here.
Thank you very much for these both wonderful talks, taking us from Sappho to alt-right in the 21st century through the axis of gender, and especially, Leonora, your description, term gender declension rather than binary is a very nice tool for us to think through and use. I mean, you and we are talking through gender, and somehow you're not assuming that, but in the 20th and to some extent 21st century scholarship, sex is invariable, it's assumed, and gender is variable, it's social. In Turkish we call it toplumsal cinsiyet, not simply cinsiyet. And you know, the question for Berke in future, in 5 minutes about translation. And but I guess in Byzantine culture we see so many examples of, just like Butler said, maybe it was always sex that was variable, and gender too, rather than gender being almost like Marxian superstructure and the biological sex not changing at all. Because especially I thought about this when you showed children becoming more men in time, although today children are assigned pink and blue costumes and everything, and balloons, and you know, as soon as, before they were born, you know, when the gender of the fetus is declared through a party. And also I think it was either Brown Neal or somebody else, I remember reading that female saintesses in Egypt in the late antique period, when they become saintesses, they stop becoming like, their bodies stop acting like a woman, like they stop menstruating, their bosoms get smaller. So in that sense, people think, biological gender is also variable. So maybe in this case, is gender, I'm going to exaggerate, a viable term to use for us to understand this very complex entity where different genders, you're not saying anything like binary system anyway. I mean, I would contradict it if you said, well, you didn't anyway. But like even gender should be understood very differently, including sex, but all of them are, as some of us said, performative, but also difficult to define, open to change and challenge and situational. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would agree that bodies, physical bodies, it's not great talk. You can talk about nature, but in that discussion of nature, I said, when you come out of the womb, you might be more or less masculine, right? So the bodies themselves are to some degree fluid, and they do change depending on your what you do with them, right? So I would say fluidity there. I think I'm comfortable with the term gender because I see it once in a while in the Greek texts, right? So the word that they use for gender of goats, right? They use for men and women, right? So say the women, phili, right? Yeah, women. So she transcended her gender, right? Or she was a credit to her gender. So I think that's all. It's all right. I mean, if there are other suggestions, I mean, it's. Again, we need to make as I opened, we have to make the scheme fit the evidence we have, right? So when it gets necessary to push away from this, I think we can certainly move away from it. But I do like the way how Berke's work brings it all the way up to now, right? So that the things that I've been talking about, and we talk about in class, are still things that people are fighting about viciously online. So for that reason, for that we're having a conversation that crosses so many different situations about gender, I would think it would be worthwhile keeping it.
Thank you so much. Before I leave the microphone, let me also ask a second question.
Sure.
Your title of your book is also presentation. It's not gender in Byzantium, but Byzantine gender. Obviously, one feels the difference between these two terms, especially. Is there something Byzantine, specifically culturally Byzantine about Byzantine gender? Or is there Armenian gender, another Christian society in the Near East, or Balkan, Slavic Christian gender? So in a very simple question, what makes Byzantine gender so special, specific to medieval Roman people, as opposed to Armenian or Syriac speaking or other northern Baltic, whatever, Slavic Christians?
I'm going to have to say that I don't know those other traditions well enough to know how they vary. I think any tradition that has the Orthodox Christian theological half is going to have at least some theologians that are saying the ideal human is man, right? And the woman is less than. And then it would depend on how much people had the Galenic idea of medicine that gives us the nature part, like how those two things are put together. As for the title of the book, I wanted to make it as simple as possible and as quick as possible for people to understand it. I actually don't believe in Byzantines. I believe in East Romans, and I've recently written on that. But Berke has told me it's important not to efface the Byzantine heritage in Turkey. So I've been trying. I think I slipped a few times and talked about East Romans. But I'm trying to affirm Byzantine culture here. But I don't believe in Byzantines. But it's just a title that I thought would be easy, right? But I take the point.
I think you wanted to ask Berke a question, or?
Well, maybe.
Oh, is there any? Oh, there's. Okay, there are. We have room for 2 more questions, probably.
While we're getting the microphone to the right place, I want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm profoundly grateful for Berke translating this work. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that he's done. It's a huge gift both to me and to Byzantine studies in Turkey. And it's so wonderful to have someone that you can have a conversation, like, what did you mean? I think I meant that, and then have that clarified. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for the speech. It was so delightful. So we know that leading roles in Byzantine is seen as masculine, yet we see there are empresses who's actually ruling the empire. So my question is, what conflicts are these women are experiencing because of their role as a woman and as an emperor?
I think they take, like Anakomnini, they end up using both methods, right? So the Theodora, the empress mother of, is it Michael III? Yeah. She is described as, when she's fighting, when she's sending off armies, she's not acting like a woman, right? So that's the path of masculinity. She's also described as a widow, in a sense that the widow who needed the men to help her, right? Which allows her to direct these men who are leading the armies for her and managing the finances for her, without that being an inversion of the gender hierarchy. So I think she's also using the poor old widow. When Theophanes talks about Empress Irene, who's the one who wasn't a regent at all, I mean, she started as a regent and then ousted her son and she became the sole ruler. He describes her as a poor widow and says that she became empress because God wanted to have the miracle of there being a poor widow and an orphan in charge of the empire when the icons were restored, right? When Psellos at some point writes a speech for the 11th century Empress Theodora, in which she says, in his voice, I mean, he ventriloquizes her, saying, I'm going to address the Senate because I'm such a noble person that I have the masculinity to talk in this forum, right? That's somewhere in there. Yeah.
Emir, do we have 10 more minutes? Okay? I can take all the questions? Okay.
Great, fabulous.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yes, we have time. Yes, good. Because he told me.
Firstly, I want to thank you, Mrs. Leonora Neville and Bihter Sabanoğlu and Mr. Berke Çetinkaya. My question is that, do we have any knowledge about how did the gender norms and the masculinity of the ruler or the royal family itself affected the legitimacy of them, and in general, how it is doctrinized between them? And also, can we say that the gender norms of Byzantium as a superstructure is mostly stems from Christianity, or rather than cultural tradition of the Byzantine?
So the first question is about how did gender strengthen people when they're ruling, right? Yeah. One of the ways you can criticize a bad emperor is to say that he's listening to his wife. So when Procopius says that Theodora is the one, so there's a riot and Justinian, the 6th century emperor, is trying to decide whether or not he should flee. And Procopius writes this stirring speech of power that Theodora says, we must stay, and purple is a noble winding cloth, and that. He's actually having her say that to make Justinian look like a wuss and like he's running away. And that same scene occurs 3 other times in later histories where it's replayed, but there it's always that the man is really strong even though he does flee or give up power because he doesn't listen to his wife, right? So if you want to make a guy look strong, you give him a wife for him to ignore, and if you want to make him look weak, you have him pay attention to his wife, right? That's perfectly standard. If you want to say an emperor is bad, you also give him a mistress and talk about them having too much sex and things. So yes, I think it's just as the competition for masculinity is seen very strongly in our narrative sources that tell us about the emperors. And the second question was,
I can repeat.
Yeah.
Can we say that the gender norms of Byzantium as a superstructure is mostly stems from Christianity?
Yeah. Okay. I think that ancient culture has a lot more impact than Christianity. I think Christianity grew up within ancient culture. And so the theologians who are the great church fathers were all trained on their Plutarch and their Xenophon and their Aristotle. And whatever happened with the rabbi in Palestine, Jesus, right? Whatever happened with that, by the time we get to Constantine, Christianity is Roman, and Christianity is very much part of the older Mediterranean culture, right? So that's why I said I can keep the basics, the same slide, the ancient ethics slide, and just add in a few extra points, because I think Christianity kind of, made it a slight, it's a nudge, right? But it's a strong kick at a very, very stable, very large boat that I don't think moves very much.
Thank you. So I think there are no further questions from there. Yeah, here. We have 2 questions here.
I think I have a question for Berke.
Great.
As far as I could follow, the alt-right approach to gender being more manly or being a bulwark against Islam, etc., sort of started with the Serbs, not Serbs themselves, but the Bosniak genocide, and then the Serbs being a bulwark against Islam, etc., and it's like people playing accordion, these famous images, remove kebab, etc., and then it sort of had a breaking point with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And after that, I have started to see people sort of distancing themselves from Byzantium, and up to that point, they have owned Orthodoxy as a kind of an alternative, more original Christianity that they have lost in the West, and it's a way of being more manly. So, have you just checked the last 2-3 years, or have you looked at this last, let's say, 20 years? Because 4chan goes a little deep, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering about your perception of the changing attitude towards Byzantium and Orthodoxy and all the related issues, and the current politics in Europe and so on. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, wonderful question. I actually, wrote. The book is actually kind of scoped on post-Soviet Western civilization and why it is post-Soviet. This is actually very much related to the changing image of Byzantium after the Soviets. I mean, the image is not only not directly related to Soviets collapse, but how the politics and the discussions really changed. But about Europe, I wrote a chapter on European and in the mainstream politics. So the book is divided into the part. First part is more about digital extremism, and second part is about more mainstream politics. But there is one chapter, for instance, about the post-Soviet European politics, and exactly similar to what you described in the Serbian case. For instance, after the post-Soviet, collapse of the Soviet, there were huge discussions. What will we do with these Soviet countries? Will we get them into European Union or not? Right? And the question is actually a question about European identity. So, are they Europeans or not? And there were two sides in these discussions, and the Byzantium popped up everywhere during this period. For instance, some people, and for instance, one of these people, I forgot his name, but he became NATO secretary afterwards. He was the Belgian representative of European Union expansion to the east at that time. It was around 93, if I'm not wrong. For instance, he wrote, we cannot allow these Orthodox countries because they are not European. Because European civilization is Catholic and Protestant and Roman. But there were also some who, at the same time, mostly Orthodox, claim we are Europeans, although we are Orthodox, and the Byzantine culture is part of European culture. And one obvious fact is that we defended Europe from Islam and the Turks before, so you have to count as well. And it is actually in the early in the early millennium, there was even a scholarship in this regard. It was Judith Herring's book, if you have read it, The Surprising Life of a Medieval Empire. It's very early 2000 book. Narrative. She really much talks about how Byzantium is really, was a bulwark against Muslims, and she directly says this is why it matters to Western civilization, and this is why Byzantium is Western. And such narrative very much taken, and also, reflected in other more extremist discourses as well. So, for instance, unfortunately, you can see Judith Herring's book is recommended. You can read this about Byzantium, but you will see that you shouldn't read Chaldeans. They say Chaldeans things Byzantines are Romans, and they blame people who defend Chaldeans as woke parts, Byzantines woke. And I also said that to Chaldeans as well.
Berke, can you repeat the term you just said? We didn't hear exactly what it was.
Wokes, Byzantine woke parts.
Woke as an insult,
Yeah, and there is just another anecdote, but I think this is important because we talk a lot about Romans in this regard, and as you asked, this European identity, the Western identity is very much bonded with Romanness. Or it's in some extremist circles, they label people who claim Byzantine Empire Roman as Byzantines, so trans. Because they say as like, you know, like trans people, so-called, Byzantium is fake Roman, so it lacks the essential qualities what makes Roman Roman. And like your trans people, like Byzantines, because like a trans woman is also lack the biological qualities of a woman, quote unquote, right? And you can see it on the extremists. So I mean, why I'm telling that this is like a Byzantium is very much like at the core of every discussion about European identity and politics everywhere in the extremism, and this is very much like a Christianity, Romanness, and like the other concepts. I mean, we also Neville also discussed in our lecture.
Okay, thank you, Berke. It's very interesting to. I mean, we have to be informed probably with such terms as Byzantines to be to have a stance against it. So we can have a magical finish with Professor Necipoğlu.
With the magical
Touch.
Turning to the translation of the book of Leonora's book, and a question for Berke regarding his translation of the title. Koray asked Leonora a question about her title, the English title. So my question is about the Turkish title, which is Bizans'ta cinsiyet. So it's the gender part. Normally gender we translate, I mean, the book is not called Byzantine Sexuality, it's called Byzantine Gender. So is there a reason why you used cinsiyet and not toplumsal cinsiyet throughout the book, including the title? I was wondering about that.
Thank you. I was expecting this question. So Necipoğlu asks, it's even harder to yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I decided on that. It was my thing, and like my editor is also there, so I have the all, you know, like so the reason actually, so yeah, I mean, we tend to translate like a gender as toplumsal cinsiyet, like, but I mean, for the Byzantines, there was no that much separation between like nature and effort. Professor Neville also talked about, and I mean, sex we translate as biological gender. I also don't use biological gender at all, and I also don't use like a biyolojik cinsiyet or toplumsal cinsiyet at all. So I use only one term, like a gender, for everything. And the reason is, I mean, basically, the Byzantines didn't separate each from each other. So the whole like biological aspect and the societal aspect were merged together. This was their understanding. If I would translate it as like toplumsal cinsiyet, I mean, that's my perspective, of course, but this means like they are completely separate. It's like a biological gender and the like toplumsal cinsiyet and biyolojik cinsiyet in Turkish. So this is why I translated it as it is, Bizans'ta cinsiyet, which I thought would be a better reflection of what really like Professor Neville discusses in her book as what is gender is.
Yeah, and he also managed to convince me, so we published it as Bizans'ta cinsiyet. So thank you very much, Berke, and thank you all for joining us here this evening. And if you have further questions, we will be around, so feel free to stay.